Part 78. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 775. When General Williams singled out these questions, everyone at the scene fell silent. Yes, if the coalition and allied forces are suddenly disconnected at this stage, it will only do more harm than good. No matter what the perspective is, this alliance cannot be interrupted. However, now that the coalition forces are angry, how can they care about this? If the Allies are still unwilling to give a satisfactory answer and unilaterally tear up the joint agreement, it is really not impossible. For example, right now, the coalition forces are already taking the first step, completely interrupting the power supply to the nuclear reactor, causing the Allies to fall into panic and chaos of power outages. As a result, some Yuri bases in the theater have seized the opportunity and taken advantage of the opportunity. Launch a strong attack. Naturally, without the electronic map and crack generator, the coalition forces will also be affected, but after all, they plan before taking action. The coalition forces must have been prepared in advance, and the impact will be much smaller than that of the Allies. Buzz. And just as everyone at the scene turned dark and silent, another urgent alarm sounded. This time the alarm was more intense than the previous ones. Even after the alarm sounded, the corresponding commander's radio call for help came out. General Bob. Sir. Emergency help. The Mind Empire has released a mind storm on us. Our base has suffered heavy losses, a large number of Yuri troops are attacking. Danger. Danger. After receiving the request for help, General Bob did not bother to reprimand Reagan anymore and responded quickly, Roger. Report your location coordinates, and I will send troops for emergency support immediately. We are at. Boom. The commander on the radio just wanted to report the location coordinates, but unexpectedly, he couldn't even tell the coordinates, but there was a sudden roar, and then there was no sound on the radio. Obviously, the command post had been bombed, and the Allied commander who asked for help had also followed the command post and died heroically. Originally, it was difficult to call for emergency help in this red alert world. After all, unlike reality, the combat time here is very short, danger often occurs, and the battle is over before reinforcements arrive. The commander was also ill and sought medical treatment in a hurry. He tried to ask for help from the headquarters, but the call for help was not completed, and the battle was basically over. Boom. When he heard this result, General Bob was furious. Well done, coalition forces. Reagan, look how much trouble you have caused us. Reagan was frightened by this drink, and he was so submissive that he didn't know how to answer. When he set out to frame Wang Ling, he did think that the coalition forces would take revenge, but he did not expect that the revenge would be so powerful, without regard to the consequences. Under such crazy revenge, Reagan was really scared. This time, he felt helpless from the bottom of his heart. The crazier the coalition forces make a fuss, the less able the Allied forces will be to protect him. Sure enough, when he was scared, General Bob didn't have time to speak, but General Williams said, Sir, the coalition is not joking this time. Now that they can cut off the power, they can tear up the joint agreement next. Just cut off the electricity has already caused us a lot of disasters, let alone the interruption of the alliance. This matter is completely our fault. No wonder the coalition forces will retaliate like this. The top priority is to eliminate the anger of the coalition forces and maintain this agreement. It's easy to put down the anger and maintain the agreement, but you have seen how angry the coalition forces are. How could they extinguish the fire so easily? General Bob was also fuming and couldn't think of any good measures for a while. But General Williams suggested, Sir, the coalition forces just want us to give them an explanation, and this explanation lies with Reagan. Now that he has done this, Reagan may have become a thorn in the side of the coalition forces. As long as Reagan, the anger of the coalition forces will not be eliminated unless they are punished. In my opinion, it is better to deal with it in accordance with military law. At the mention of military law, Reagan trembled with fright, and then quickly begged for mercy. "No, sir, I am doing this for the future of our allies. I am doing this for the sake of our allies to eradicate the threat of Wanling in advance army." Humph. You keep saying it is for our allies, but look what you have done now. Not to mention the anger of the alliance, just pushing Wanling to the Seoul Empire is enough to shoot you, Bob. The general was also furious and scolded Reagan. After the reprimand, General Bob took a deep breath and suddenly changed his tone. "However, I also know that you are for the Allies after all. No matter how important Wanling is, he is not as good as my Allied commander. Military law. It's not necessary. People are forgetful animals. First remove Reagan from the position of commander and put him in jail. After a long time, the coalition forces will gradually forget these things, and then he can serve again." They are indeed trying to find ways to stabilize the coalition forces, but General Bob's decision has a strong sense of luck and discrimination. In his heart, Reagan is obviously more important than Wanling, and the punishment at this stage is only expedient. Count. After Reagan heard the decision, he was immediately overjoyed and thanked him profusely. When General Bob saw him like this, he seemed to hate the iron. He glared at him and didn't want to say any more. He turned to a staff member and said, "Tell the coalition forces about the decision you just made, Richie. You know what to say and what not to say, and try to give me a harsher punishment." Yes. On the Allied side, under pressure from the coalition forces, they finally took action. In order to force the Allies to give an explanation, the Allies actually did not have a good time this time. As General Williams said, the alliance between the two armies is mutually beneficial. The Allies use the Allied forces' power, and the Allied forces also use the Allied forces' electronic maps and crack generators. The unilateral cut-off of power supply caused a power outage to almost all Allied bases in the theater. The full-field electronic map originally used by the coalition was also interrupted, and the crack generator was also passively disabled. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yuri troops from various war zones also launched a charge against the coalition forces. Even the gene mutation took advantage of the failure of the crack generator to patronize a coalition base. However, since such a thing has been done, the coalition forces have naturally been well prepared. The density of soldiers and tanks is very small, and the defensive buildings basically use a large number of combat bunkers that do not require electricity. They also cover a large number of infantry, although they have suffered many attacks. But it was much smaller than the Allied losses. Within the general headquarters, PoortoRich can also view the battle situation in each theater through the electronic map of the coalition forces. The overall loss is still within the tolerable range. But from the perspective of the Allied forces, it's quite exciting. Whether it's a calculation or not, this sudden power outage can cause serious harm to the Allied bases. Many bases have been visited by a large number of Yuri troops, and they are still relying on the guards of the bases to fight to the death. Resisting. Humph. That's the effect. After delaying it for so long, do you really think I'm joking? Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 776. Due to the sudden power outage, the Allied bases in various war zones have been hit to varying degrees. The most serious one has been attacked by the super-weapon Psychic Storm of the Mind Empire and is now in a dilapidated state. On the edge of the battlefield, the command post and other various buildings were all pushed aside, leaving only a few defeated soldiers still fleeing. There are also several Allied bases, and the situation is not very good. Without the support of defensive buildings such as light prism towers, the defense strength in the bases has been greatly reduced. Yuri's troops took the opportunity to launch successive strong attacks and conquered several lines of defense. The defenders could only fight and retreat. Although the situation of other Allied bases is not so bad, many of them have been attacked by Yuri's troops. Fortunately, they have repelled Yuri's troops, but some bases are still in fierce fighting. Looking around, all major war zones are currently experiencing frequent wars and are very lively and chaotic. After observing the scene on the electronic map, PoortoRich not only showed no mercy, but even sneered. Compared to the Allied forces Reagan's attempt to frame Wang Ling during the alliance, what are these revenges? If there is no satisfactory answer, the next step is to directly tear up the joint agreement, and the two armies will instantly turn against each other. If we really take this step, everything will be irreversible, and the original battle for hegemony will instantly escalate into a battle of annihilation. Only one of the three major forces, the Seoul Empire, the Alliance Army and the Allied forces, can survive. For this reason, PoortoRich is not too eager to tear up the agreement, but if the Allies insist on refusing to give a satisfactory answer, then no one can blame them. Coach. There is news from the Allies. At this moment, a staff member suddenly reported news about the Allied forces. When PoortoRich heard this, he quickly checked. This news was naturally the decision of Allied Commander General Bob to punish Reagan. General Bob's intention was to temporarily remove Reagan from his post and put him in jail. After the coalition gradually forgot about Wang Ling, he would be released and his official position would be restored. However, the message sent to the coalition forces has changed too much. The message stated that General Bob was furious, removed all of Reagan's positions, and temporarily put him in jail. When the war subsided, he would be sent to a military court to be held responsible under military law. At the end of the message, he even implored the coalition forces to calm down and focus on the overall situation of the joint battle, hinting that the coalition forces would restore power supply. No matter what happens in the future, at least at this stage, the Allied forces' actions are still the same as in the news, and the Allied forces can easily investigate. After confirming the news, PoortoRich's furious mood finally eased. In the general command post, other generals also breathed a sigh of relief after learning about it. They did not want to really tear up the joint agreement unless they had to. One of the generals asked shortly after, "Coach, the news from the Allies seems to be sincere. What should we do? Do we want to restore the power supply?" Sincerity. However, after PoortoRich heard these two words, he smiled very playfully. If they were really sincere, they should immediately execute that bastard Reagan. But they didn't, and instead played with me with words. Game. The war has slowed down a bit. What is considered a slowdown in the war? At that time, we gradually adapted to the days of losing Wang Ling. Who can say for sure whether Reagan will be dealt with by military law or reinstated as an official? Good guy. As expected, General Bob's thoughts were revealed by PoortoRich at a glance. However, people's hearts are far apart. PoortoRich can only guess, but cannot really confirm. After hearing PoortoRich's words, the expressions of the generals on the scene also changed several times. So, the Allies are playing tricks on us. PoortoRich shook his head and said, "It's not like we are being fooled. The Allies must also be aware of the serious consequences after the alliance agreement is broken. At this stage, they are unwilling to completely turn against us and are also thinking of ways to dispel our anger. To make up for Reagan's mistakes. No one can tell what will happen in the future, whether Reagan will be dealt with by military law. At least at this stage, the Allies have indeed weakened against us and want to use punishment on Reagan to repair the joint relationship between the two sides. So the Allies are also afraid? After doing something like this, I thought they were fearless and could withstand our anger." One of the generals then became sarcastic. Another general asked, "Reagan is the mastermind of this incident. Now that the Allies have softened and deposed and imprisoned Reagan, what about us? Do we want to go down the slope?" "Down the slope? Huh, that's not enough, PoortoRich crossed his arms, as if he was still annoyed. The anger of the Allied forces cannot be dismissed so easily. Since the Allies have this attitude of repairing relations, then we don't have to go too far, and we don't have to tear up the joint agreement. However, they didn't kill the bastard Reagan, which is not enough to dispel our anger. The power from the nuclear reactor is still not being delivered. Humph, he in Bob's eyes, Reagan is more important than Wang Ling, but in my eyes, compared with Wang Ling, who is Reagan? Yes. Reagan is still alive. This bastard brought Wang Ling to this state. If he doesn't die, it won't be enough to quell our anger. That's fine. We don't tear up the agreement, and we don't supply electricity. What do you mean? Let them decide for themselves. The atmosphere within the Allied General Headquarters is much more harmonious than that of the Allied forces. The generals almost unanimously agree with PoortoRich's ideas. Then PoortoRich said, "Don't hit the smiling man. Since the Allies are seeking peace, we don't need to be too aggressive. They are playing word games, so are we." "Yes, sir," the coalition forces have responded. The efficiency of the Allied forces was quite high. After making the decision, they immediately drafted a reply message document and sent it to the Allied General Headquarters. General Bob and the others had been waiting for a long time. After receiving the news, they immediately browsed it. In the reply, the coalition did praise the Allies' attitude of admitting their mistakes and promised not to take the initiative to tear up the joint agreement again. He also expressed the hope that the Allies would not behave like this again, which would irritate both sides. Then, it was gone. This reply was just that simple, but it was deliberately lengthened using official words. After reading the reply, many Allied generals glanced at each other, their eyes seemed a little confused. Of course, these old foxes saw the key points in the reply. After a while, someone finally asked, "The coalition promised not to take the initiative to tear up the joint agreement. It seems that our decision has had an effect." However, they seemed not to say a word. The issue of power was not mentioned. The power in all war zones has not been restored yet. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 777. Yes, the Allies are quite sensitive to the coalition's attitude now, especially when the coalition may tear up the joint agreement at any time. Whether it is war or peace at this stage all depends on the attitude of this reply. In the reply, the coalition did promise not to take the initiative to tear up the armistice agreement, but the current situation has still not changed. The power outage is still outage, and the reply does not include any news about electricity. This is worth pondering. Snort. General Bob, who is also an old fox at the commander level, naturally quickly figured out what PoortoRich meant. He snorted coldly and explained, "Isn't the meaning obvious enough? The coalition forces are also playing word games with us. Promising not to take the initiative to tear up the coalition agreement is indeed downhill. Our decision has had some effect, at least it will not lead to war. However, they are obviously still dissatisfied with our decision and did not shoot Reagan immediately. So I refuse to give in anymore, deliberately not replying to the topic of electricity and maintaining the status quo. This coalition has gone too far. That's right, we have already punished Reagan, but they are still so unrelenting. The dignified coalition forces are so petty. Did they really expect us to shoot Reagan?" When many Allied generals heard this, they all expressed indignation and seemed to be very shameless at what the Allied forces had done. However, there is someone who understands among them. General William, as the person who proposed the alliance from the beginning, has a far better view of the overall situation than other generals. After hearing these words, he couldn't help but sarcastically said, "That's right. What a joke, we were clearly at fault in this matter. We all know Wang Ling's importance to the coalition forces. In the eyes of the coalition forces, Reagan's importance is far less than that of Wang Ling. We just imprisoned him. Reagan, the concessions to us are nothing to the coalition forces. If they can promise not to tear up the coalition agreement, they are already considering the overall situation. If we make a small step, do we expect the coalition forces to make any concessions? A big step? In my impression, the coalition forces are not so easy to talk to. After being reprimanded, the other generals didn't look very good for a while. After a brief silence, a two-star general asked, "Then what should we do?" General William pondered for a moment and replied, "The coalition is resolute. If we want them to really put out the fire, I'm afraid they have to execute Reagan as soon as possible." Snort. After hearing this, regardless of what happened to the other Allied generals, General Bob interrupted with a cold snort, "Execution of Reagan for Wang Ling?" Again, Wang Ling's position is not comparable to that of our allies. Commander. When the coalition forces are angry, can they freely manipulate our allies? Impossible. This time, even General William was really speechless. General Bob's discrimination against the coalition forces was deep-rooted. On the one hand, it is true that it wants to eliminate the anger of the coalition forces, but on the other hand, it is unwilling to act in accordance with the wishes of the coalition forces. This idea itself is contradictory. Under the contradiction, the scene inevitably fell into silence again, and only the sound of the operation of various instruments could be heard. After a while, General Bob had an idea. "Don't you want to deliver electricity? We also have our own power plants, it's just consuming more resources. Go, notify the bases in each war zone, build your own power plants, and get rid of the coalition forces' power control." Yes. A staff member took the order and immediately began to convey it. But General William persuaded, "General, we can naturally build power plants, but the main problem now is not electricity. Continuing like this is not an option after all. Not to mention the coming second the military technology exchange, just because of this incident, it is still unknown whether the coalition will be willing to exchange again." Alas, this time, General Bob did not continue to be tough. Instead, he sighed, "I know it too, but asking me to execute Reagan is impossible. To eliminate the anger of the coalition forces, let's think about it from other aspects in the future. Let's start solving the power supply problem now." Wang Ling was framed by Reagan. This incident really affected the whole body. The relationship between the coalition forces and the Allied forces fundamentally changed. Not only were the lower-level soldiers in conflict with each other, but even the high-level generals were in conflict with each other. They are also hostile, and the commanders of both sides are fighting openly and covertly. Naturally, the two sides are in a joint state after all, and the Allies are really in the wrong. Under the anger of the Allied forces, the Allies are suffering losses everywhere, and these days are really miserable. The Allied forces suddenly cut off the power supply, and the next step was to threaten to completely interrupt the alliance. The Allied forces responded by imprisoning Reagan, and they barely managed to maintain the alliance. But that was all. The power was still not restored, and the war zone's Allied bases were unwilling to help the Allied bases fight the enemy. Against this background, the impact of Yuri's troops directly destroyed one Allied base, seriously injured two others, and many other bases were damaged to varying degrees. In this aspect alone, the Allied forces had suffered enough losses. However, the coalition forces still have not completely extinguished the fire, and power is still refused to be supplied. There is no other way. Under the order of General Bob, the major bases can only spend their own resources to build large-scale power plants. After several days, the Allied bases in each war zone finally restored their power supply one after another, relying on self-built power plants. The electronic video and crack generators were also restored to use, and the bases were truly stabilized. However, questions have arisen. The coalition forces have cut off the power supply. Do we still need to continue sharing the electronic map? Do you want to share the effects of the crack generator with them? To address this issue, several meetings were held in the Allied General Headquarters to discuss the issue. During the meeting, a considerable number of Allied generals proposed to interrupt the supply and wait until the Allied forces restored power and corrected their attitude before sharing. However, a group of generals headed by General Williams strongly opposed it. The reason was that Reagan was the first to destabilize the two armies. It was their allies, not the coalition. If the allies were in a phase that was not peaceful, if the sharing of electronic maps and crack generators is interrupted, it will be difficult for the relationship between the two militaries to return to its original state of normal cooperation. The results went back and forth, and the two sides argued with each other for a while. In the end, General Bob decided and continued to share. Of course, these meetings were all held secretly at the headquarters and were not disclosed. All electronic maps and crack generators were not interrupted by the coalition forces from beginning to end. But in fact, the coalition forces are actually ready to interrupt these exchanges. If the Allies are still willing to share, they will be tacit. After the conflict between the two parties was suppressed on the surface, they finally had the energy to deal with Mater Newtown and find a way to rescue Wang Ling. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 778. Speaking of Wang Ling Lei, Mater New City is quite interesting. Although he was a prisoner, Wang Ling acted like an uncle in Yuri's base in Mater New City. The amplification of his dark personality also makes Wang Ling very domineering. Anyone he doesn't like will be scolded and scolded directly. Anyone who dares to contradict him will be beaten directly. At first, many Yuri troops were wary of Wang Ling. After all, he had previously forced back the crazy coalition forces, and almost killed all the Allied attacking troops with one man. The impression of the god of death was really deep. But later, Wang Ling was too arrogant, which aroused the indignation of several squad leaders in the base. As a result, he summoned dozens of Yuri recruits to try to teach Wang Ling a lesson. But who could have imagined that Wang Ling also had itchy hands and refused to reject anyone who came, without even using a weapon, and beat up dozens of people by himself. Unwilling to do so, they found more than a dozen orcs to try to regain the place. Indeed, Wang Ling was very strong, but in terms of pure strength, he was still no match for the orcs, and he suffered some losses in head-to-head encounters. However, Wang Ling was much more flexible than these wild orcs, and his tactics were changeable, and his fighting ability was very powerful. Before the captains were proud, he quickly changed his strategy and used fighting methods to deal with it. It didn't take long for these 10 the remaining wild orcs were beaten until they were unable to find their way. After provoking trouble twice in succession, the squad leaders finally lost their temper. There is no way, even if you are not convinced, you can't beat Wang Ling. Naturally, Yuri. However, the target was Wang Ling, and Yuri moreover, leader Yuri valued Wang Ling even more than him. After comprehensive consideration, Yuri X did not feel uncomfortable about this. Fortunately, although Wang Ling was arrogant, he still saved some face for them and never killed anyone again. Naturally, the amplification of his dark personality also made Wang Ling unscrupulous, acting erratically but also very bold. In Yuri's army, because the attack method is to unleash supernatural power, they rarely drink alcohol, otherwise the impact will be too great. But Wang Ling didn't care about this at all. From time to time, he summoned a group of Yuri recruits and even some wild orcs to have a drink together. Even though these Yuri recruits have poor drinking abilities, they are all very greedy. Wang Ling's bold approach happened to suit their wishes. With this backer, not even Yuri X can teach them a lesson. As a result, a group of Yuri recruits were so drunk that they were drunk. However, the wild orcs drink a lot, so they don't have to worry about drunkenness. In the end, a group of Yuri recruits got drunk. Wang Ling was stunned and led a group of wild orcs to drink. Yuri, I was very annoyed, but I dared not speak out. What the hell is this kind of treatment for prisoners? The commander wouldn't even dare to do this. Of course, these psychic troops were not the only ones with ugly faces. All the coalition officers and soldiers in the Mater New City war zone, especially the members of the Wolf Group, were filled with grief and anger when they saw the scene on the electronic map. That was their hero and their team leader, but now he was drinking and chatting with Yuri's troops, the enemy of life and death. How ironic this seemed to them. Allies. Grandma. Whenever their grief and anger reached a certain level, this group of people would always cast resentful glances in the direction of the Allied base. Isn't it because of them that Wang Ling became like this? They have been cursed remotely, and I don't know how many times the officers and soldiers at the two Allied bases have sneezed in the past few days. Naturally, while they were angry, the coalition forces did not give up on Wang Ling. According to General Reagan's observation, the main thing that controls Wang Ling is the psychic beacon in the center of Mater New City. As long as this thing is destroyed, Wang Ling will return to his original state in an instant. However, the psychic beacon is something more terrifying than the psychic control tower. The control range can actually cover an entire city. It is impossible for ordinary troops to attack by force. Special treatment in special times. After some discussions with General Li Wiki and others, they finally decided to use the Air Force to attack at all costs and blow up the psychic beacon. For this reason, in the past few days, the two coalition bases have spared no effort to develop and create Air Force. The air defense force of the Yuri base is powerful. Usually, Kirov airships are rarely used when attacking in major war zones. But now, they have to use them, and they are used on a large scale. In a few days, the two bases actually more than 20 Kirov airships were improvised. This shows how crazy it is. If 20 Kirov airships attack together, no matter how strong the Yuri base's air defense is, they will be frightened when they see this posture. However, the two major coalition bases were not enough, and they were still vigorously building them until the total number reached 30. 30 Kirov airships. I'm afraid it won't be a problem even if they flatten the Great War Zone. The coalition forces also spent a lot of money to rescue Wang Ling. Of course, this was not enough. After the appearance of 30 Kirov airships, they were immediately dispatched to go ahead, while the two major bases urgently built armed helicopters. By the time 30 Kirov airships arrived outside Mater New City, the two bases had built a total of more than 20 armed helicopters, and each had mobilized 10 armed helicopters from their field groups. They were immediately dispatched after the assembly. Bound for Mater New Town. 30 Kirov airships and 40 armed helicopters. Not to mention the enemy troops, even the coalition forces couldn't help but feel excited when they saw this luxurious lineup. They shouted loudly. The Allies even took a breath of air and secretly sighed at the coalition's crazy. The troops are ready, and the next step is to attack. 30 Kirov airships took the lead, divided into two directions, bypassed the Yuri base in Mater New City alone, and rushed straight towards the central square. The target was very obvious. However, the Yuri troops are not fools. The importance of psychic beacons to them is too great and they have to be sensitive. After judging the targets of these Kirov airships, the base commander immediately dispatched laser UFOs and getters. The tank army was divided into two groups, each to intercept two groups of Kirov airships. They even ordered the emergency construction of more getter cannons near the central square to deal with the enemy's air force threat in turn. Choo choo choo. Choo choo choo. Da da da. Da da da. The battle began soon. Two batches of laser UFOs and getter tanks ran into the Kirov airship army head-on. They opened fire without hesitation and tried their best to output. As for those Kirov airships, they had no time to pay attention to them. They could only use their super high armor and life to carry such ferocious firepower and charge forcefully. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 779. Swish swish swish. Swish swish swish. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. Given the incompatible relationship between the Soul Empire and the Allied forces, when they meet, they will naturally fight to the death. The two waves of anti-aircraft troops blocking the Kirov airships focused on their targets and struck them to death. After concentrating fire, they killed one ship soon and then aimed at the next one. Da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. Under such a rapid blockade, the firepower of a large number of jet tanks suddenly increased to a higher level, and their attack power and speed were greatly accelerated. In conjunction with the laser UFO's attack, another tank was quickly killed. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. After firing again for a period of time, the firepower of the large number of getter tanks finally increased to the highest level. It seemed like they were going crazy when they fired. Due to the super high speed of the bullets fired from the muzzle, the flames brought out could almost spray out 2 or 3 times. Meters away. Under such crazy shooting, 2 more Kirov airships were sunk. However, just when these jet tanks were about to maintain the highest level of firepower and continue shooting, the Kirov airships had already flown past their air defense range. As a last resort, these jet tanks could only hurriedly cease fire, move their positions and chase and shoot from the rear. This efficiency is naturally far inferior to the highest level of firepower under fixed-point shooting. However, under this pursuit shooting, Kirov airships were continuously shot down along the way. According to this posture, it is still unknown whether the 2 batches of Kirov airships can successfully rush to the center of Mater New City. Different from the previous attack on Yuri Base, no matter how big Yuri Base is, it is only too big. No matter how slow the Kirov airships are, 30 ships coming out together with a batch of anti-aircraft firepower are enough to bomb the entire base upside down. But now, Mad New City is a very prosperous metropolis. Its area is far beyond what a Yuri base can compare with. Breaking in from the periphery and flying to the center of the city, at the speed of Kirov airship, it was somewhat difficult, giving enough time to kill the anti-aircraft troops shooting along the way. During this process, the Kirov airship also tried to take the lead in blowing up the blocking jet tanks. However, these jet tanks were also very tricky. Whenever a Kirov airship approached, they would directly move the location and use ground tanks. At such a speed, the Kirov airship simply cannot catch up with them. There was no other way. After a lot of back and forth, the Kirov airship army also gave up this approach. They could only bite the bullet and rush towards the central square with huge losses. Of course, in fact, the coalition forces are also aware of the shortcomings of Kirov airships, and hope is not all on the airships. Just when these 2 batches of Kirov airships attracted most of the air defense firepower of Yuri Base, 40 however, an armed helicopter rushed from the other direction and rushed towards the central square. At the speed of the armed helicopters, not even the getter tanks and laser UFOs could catch up. 2 groups of air defense units were restrained. These armed helicopters were unscrupulous, relying on their super high mobility to break into the new town of Mater. As if entering uninhabited territory, they were not blocked by any air defense forces along the way, and they rushed straight to the vicinity of the central square. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. But here in the central square, there are also a large number of Yuri troops stationed. Not only are there a large number of jet tanks, but there are also many jet cannons. The anti-aircraft firepower is dense and powerful. When 40 armed helicopters arrived, the anti-aircraft firepower outside the square immediately opened fire, severely beating these armed helicopters. The armed helicopters were not as resistant to beating as the Kirov airships. Not long after they fired, these armed helicopters began to fall downwards one by one at a very fast speed. If it were normal times, these armed helicopters could take the lead in dealing with the getter tanks on the periphery and reduce the enemy's firepower. However, the current situation is special and the armed helicopters simply cannot withstand such waste. The cost of killing these air defense forces is too high. They have task. For this reason, a group of armed helicopters braved the intensive firepower of Yuri's troops, forced a charge, crossed the outer fire circle, broke into the central square, and finally approached the central psychic beacon under the obstruction of numerous getter cannons. Hey, do you think I don't exist? But at this moment, Wang Ling, whom the coalition forces wanted to rescue, unexpectedly appeared in the central square at some unknown time. However, the armed helicopter had no time to pay attention to him. After approaching the psychic beacon, it tried to fire forcefully. I'll let you off once. You still don't know what's going on. You deserve a beating. But Wang Ling was no longer happy. He instantly transformed into a king-level anti-aircraft infantry, and quickly opened fire at the armed helicopter in the air. Dong 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 dong. Dong 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 dong. To say that Wang Ling's air defense capabilities are slightly weaker is just a relative term. After all, the combat effectiveness of his king-level elite combat soldiers is too powerful. In fact, the firepower of this king-level anti-aircraft infantry is not overwhelming. Its speed and power are equivalent to 5 or 6 elite-level anti-aircraft tracked vehicles superimposed. The armed helicopter group simply cannot withstand such bombardment, just like dumplings, falling rapidly into pieces one after another. The last time he dealt with the coalition forces, Wang Ling did not make a move and drove away all the coalition forces. However, Wang Ling is now a member of the Seoul Empire, and he will not show mercy to the coalition forces every time. The experience of these armed helicopters just confirms this. It is ironic to say that when Wang Ling was in the Allied forces, he often dumpled the Allied Air Force, and later dumplings the Air Force of the Seoul Empire. Now the situation has changed, and even the Allied forces have tasted this. This batch of armed helicopters was huge in number, and they attacked the psychic beacon almost regardless of the cost. However, the air defense force of Yuri's troops was too strong, and they also had a powerful Wang Ling to help them. As a result, the batch of armed helicopters were completely destroyed, and in the end it only knocked out about a quarter of the psychic beacon's health. The role of the psychic beacon is naturally self-evident. The Psychic Empire did not dare to damage it too much. It almost immediately sent out engineering troops to quickly restore the psychic beacon under emergency repairs. The number of remaining Kirov airships is also becoming increasingly scarce. They are constantly being chased and beaten by the air defense forces of Yuri's troops during their movement. One after another they fall. Even if they really reach the central square, they are unable to withstand the large number of them. The air defense forces bombarded. At this point, the plan has almost failed. Boom. Hateful. In the command post of the coalition base, General Li Wiki was very angry. They had spent a lot of money to bomb the psychic beacon this time, but unexpectedly, they failed in the end. Looking at Wang Ling in the central square of the electronic map, General Li Wiki just wanted to scold his mother. Wang Ling, this bastard, doesn't want to come back so much. He actually helps the Seoul Empire to fight against our Air Force. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 780. However, King Xiaoping was able to see things clearly. General, Wang Ling is now under control after all. He essentially belongs to the Seoul Empire. It is not surprising that he would attack our Air Force. It's just that with the addition of his anti-aircraft firepower, Our plan can't be solved, it's really even harder to achieve. That's right, Wang Ling's anti-aircraft firepower is so strong that it's almost abnormal. Let alone the Yuri base, just breaking through his own anti-aircraft firepower is not an easy task, even Rovitsky agreed. Got up. General Lewicki was helpless. Well, if the Allied Air Force is willing to cooperate, the hope should be greater. However, Rovitsky was a little disdainful. Wang Ling was harmed by them, how could he count on them? At this point, General Lewicki had to fall silent. Indeed, the Allies seemed to be eager for something to happen to Wang Ling. Is it possible to pay such a high price to save Wang Ling? General. But at this moment, Zhao Pingwang suddenly discovered something and shouted quickly, look at the electronic map. General Lewicki and Rouski quickly looked at the electronic map area designated by King Xiaoping, and found that the Allied forces had dispatched two large groups of troops in succession, and rushed towards Mater New City in a hurry. This scene made the three people's eyes light up. They quickly zoomed in on the electronic map and unfolded the electronic video. Only then did they realize that these two large groups of Allied troops were actually invader fighter jets and remote-controlled tanks. Yes, there are also uncontrolled troops in the Allied forces. The Air Force intruder fighter jets and the Army remote-control tanks are typical representatives. The Allies are not stupid either. They are aware of the threat that psychic beacons pose to ordinary troops. They have actually produced a large number of invader fighter jets and remote-controlled tanks in these days. Visual inspection from the electronic map showed that the number of these invader fighters was a full 40, which meant that the Allies actually built 10 Air Command headquarters during this period. The number of remote-controlled tanks is even more exaggerated. They are densely packed and move very irregularly and are difficult to count, but the total number is definitely over 100. In real life, more than 100 tanks appear together, which is already so spectacular that it makes people's hearts beat wildly, let alone in this red alert world. Looking at the number of these tanks, it's almost mind-numbing. Seeing this, even General Lewicki couldn't help but gasped, are the Allies crazy? Why did they build so many invader fighters and remote-controlled tanks? Rovitsky also lamented, as far as I know, the price of Allied remote-controlled tanks is not expensive, but no matter how cheap it is, it can't support the large number. More than 100 units were manufactured at one time, and there were 10 airports and 4 10 invader fighter planes. I'm afraid this one breath can drain the savings of an entire Allied base, right? Zhao Pingwang nodded, but asked a very tricky question. Indeed, ordinary bases cannot bear this kind of wasteful production. What kind of wind is this on the Allied side? They are also trying their best. Bombing the psychic beacon, or is their goal to take the opportunity to kill Wang Ling? As soon as the question this came up, Rovitsky was stunned. Indeed, although the coalition forces and the Allied forces are united, the relationship is delicate after all. That old guy Reagan can use super weapons to persecute Wang Ling. It is completely reasonable for other Allied forces to take the opportunity to kill Wang Ling. However, the Allies should not be stupid. They almost fell out with the Allies. If they want to kill Wang Ling at this time, then the two sides must break up directly, right? Talking about bombing the psychic beacon to save Wang Ling. This is also a bit puzzling. Will the Allies spend such a high price to save Wang Ling? Forget it, no matter what they do, we can't stop them. Just wait and see what happens. General Lewicki didn't want to make random guesses. He crossed his arms and stared at the electronic video. He sneered and said, even if he really wants to, if they want to kill Wang Ling, their strength may not be enough. Wang Ling is a weakling who cannot be killed. Buzzing. Naturally, the Allies did not know the speculations of the Allied forces. Now these two large groups of troops are still running around in a hurry. In terms of speed, the intruder fighter plane was naturally faster. Not long after, it was far away from the remote-controlled tank and flew forward at the lead. The hum of the aircraft engine continued to be heard in the air. A total of 40 invader fighter planes charged together. You can imagine the shock of this scene. In the game, if 40 fighter planes come out together, it is almost invincible. No matter how strong the air defense of a Yuri base is, I can't stand this crazy bombing. Naturally, during the bombing, the losses of the invader fighter planes will not be small. Good guy, 40 invader fighter planes. Hee, the Allies really think highly of me. As for this scene, not long after the battle ended, Wang Ling also observed it from the electronic map and couldn't help but show a playful smile. But, do you really think that 40 invader fighter planes can blow up the psychic beacon? You seem to have ignored me. As he spoke, Wang Ling maintained his posture as a king-level air defense infantry, accurately calculated the intrusion route of the intruder fighter planes, walked out of the central square in advance, and blocked the only way for these aircraft to pass. At the speed of the invader fighter planes, it didn't take too long to fly over a city. After a period of sailing, the 40 planes flew towards the central square according to the route determined by Wang Ling. The show is about to begin. However, Wang Ling was not worried at all. Instead, he showed a cruel smile, and when the intruder fighter plane approached, he opened fire quickly. Dong 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 dong. Dong 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 dong. The coalition's air defense efficiency is higher than that of the Allies, mainly due to the weapons and attack methods of anti-aircraft tracked vehicles and anti-aircraft guns, and the air defense efficiency of elite-level anti-aircraft tracked vehicles is even better. But Wang Ling's firepower alone is equivalent to 5 to 6 elite anti-aircraft tracked vehicles stacked together, and the anti-aircraft firepower is even more outrageous. Boom. Boom boom boom. As a result, under his bombardment, the front row of intruder fighter jets were shot down in large areas, and they fell one by one. The speed was much faster than dumplings. It was like a luxurious game. Like a meteor shower. Dong 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 dong. But Wang Ling, who caused this scene, kept firing the cannon with an expressionless face. The firepower was surging, and the splash damage caused him to be a huge nemesis of the intruder fighter planes. There are many intruder fighter planes, but no matter how many they are, they can't withstand such a bombardment. Just by flying over Wang Ling's head, he shot down about half of the planes in his lifetime. That's not all. The fleet of aircraft only passed over his head, but failed to fly through his circle of fire. Wang Ling was still holding the barrel of the gun, pursuing desperately. Da-da-da. Da-da-da. Not only that, after passing Wang Ling, the Getter tanks and Getter cannons in the rear also opened fire. Coupled with Wang Ling's firepower, the remaining invader fighter planes were even worse, and their number dropped sharply again. Finally, at a huge cost, he broke through Wang Ling's fire circle and flew to the central square, but only 4 of the originally mighty army of invader fighter planes remained. Swish swish swish. There was no choice but to carry out the mission no matter how little. The 4 invader fighter planes dropped missiles without hesitation, blowing up half of the psychic beacon's health in an instant. But the cost of doing so was also very heavy. After dropping bombs, the remaining 4 invader fighter jets were shot down by Getter cannons. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 781. Boom. Click. As the last 4 invader fighter planes were shot down and crashed, the Allied fighter fleet was also wiped out. A total of 40 invader fighter planes, according to common sense, are almost trying to blow up something on the entire battlefield with huge losses, and they will never fail. But now, with the addition of Wang Ling's firepower in Mater New City, this myth has been shattered. The powerful air defense force has even frightened the Allies. 40 invader fighter planes, in the end, they only blew up half of the psychic beacon's health. Not to mention that the Allies found the scene difficult to accept, even the surrounding Yuri troops were a little unbelievable. Seeing such a majestic army of invader fighter planes, all the Yuri troops were so frightened that their legs became weak. However, how long had passed before all the fighter planes crashed? The contrast between the scenes before and after was so shocking that many Yuri troops looked at Wang Ling with a little fear. However, this is not over yet. For this attack, the Allies have not only 40 invader fighter planes, but also more than 100 remote-controlled tanks, which are still running behind the scenes. There were hundreds of remote-controlled tanks, viewed on the electronic map, and the visual impact was stronger than 40 invader fighter jets. After seeing it, many Yuri troops also swallowed their saliva, feeling full of powerlessness in their hearts. However, when he saw these remote-controlled tanks, Wang Ling did not panic at all, and even laughed. Do the Allies have money and nowhere to spend it? They created a lot of waste and let me practice. Around him, some Yuri recruits raised their lips in an exaggerated manner when they heard what he said. These more than 100 remote-controlled tanks, if commanded properly, can probably overwhelm 2 or 3 Yuri bases. It is not difficult to destroy the psychic beacon under a forced charge, and these Yuri troops cannot intercept them at all. Live. But in Wang Ling's eyes, these remote-controlled tanks were actually treated as waste and used for training. This is too shocking. Buzzing. Buzzing. The group of remote-controlled tanks and the operators behind them did not know that they had been treated as fish on the chopping block, and the tank army was still charging in a mighty manner. Although the speed of the remote-controlled tanks was not as fast as that of the invader fighter planes, after driving for a while, they still followed the established route, bypassed Yuri base and broke into Mad New City. The whole army headed straight towards the central square. There is a feeling of majesty and high-spiritedness. Including the previous batch of invader fighters, they no longer care about the cost in order to attack by force, and they even have a crazy feeling, not only being cruel to themselves, but also being cruel to others. There is nothing visible about the invader fighter planes yet, but the behavior of these remote-controlled tanks shows some dominance. Due to the existence of the spiritual beacon in Mater New City, all the ordinary people in the city were forcibly controlled and became like walking zombies, without knowing how to avoid danger. On the route of the remote-controlled tank army, there were inevitably some ordinary residents, but these remote-controlled tanks did not give way at all, and rolled over forcefully. More than 20 people died in the remote-controlled tanks along the road. Under the chassis. But now, under the general situation of the war, except for a few thoughtful personnel, not many people pay attention to these civilians at all. The Empire of Mind was powerful, but it was unable to spread its patrol forces throughout Mater New City. Some of the patrol tanks encountered along the road were almost killed by the army of remote-control tanks, failing to intercept them for half a second. Maintaining this momentum, the army of remote-controlled tanks finally gradually approached the central square and broke into Wang Ling's circle of fire. Ever since, the hunt begins. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. Wang Ling had transformed into an elite combat soldier at the king level early in the morning. Under the fire rate as fast as a Gatling gun and the extremely powerful destructive power, these remote-controlled tanks were like living targets. Anyone who broke into this place within the range, they were immediately detonated. Although the remote control tank is stronger than the multi-purpose infantry vehicle, it is still a light armor type. At best, it is comparable to the Getter tank. It cannot withstand Wang Ling's shooting and is no better than the infantry. It happened that this army of remote-controlled tanks had received a death order. Even with Wang Ling's fatal blockage, they still charged like moths to a flame. As a result, the explosions of all Getter tanks were connected together, just like setting off firecrackers. Ever heard? The treatment that Yuri's troops had often suffered before was now finally the turn of the Allies to try. Around Wang Ling, the Yuri troops who were originally frightened looked at the scene and listened to the explosions, and they were all stunned. Da-da-da-da-da. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. However, Wang Ling didn't care about this at all and continued to shoot rapidly. Despite the huge number of these remote-controlled tanks, in fact, in Wang Ling's eyes, they were simply not enough. More than 100 remote-controlled tanks, under such moths flying into the flames, it didn't take long for them all to explode. Once it was clear, the surrounding defensive Yuri troops had no chance to take action. The previous explosions were too loud, but after all the remote-controlled tanks were wiped out, all the sounds fell silent. From extreme movement to extreme stillness, the scene turned out to be very strange. While witnessing the scene from the side, the group of Yuri troops were already dumbfounded. They had just recovered from the fear of the army of remote-controlled tanks, and then fell into fear of Wang Ling again, and were still afraid of Wang Ling. More than that, after some Yuri recruits came to their senses, they looked at Wang Ling, as if they were looking at a monster. But Wang Ling didn't seem to notice it. He casually put the terrifying rifle on his shoulder and spat, "Vulnerable." After saying that, he turned around, ignored the group of Yuri troops, and walked straight into the central square. "Wang Ling. You bastard. He is cool, but some people are troubled, such as Agent Tanya." After Reagan was dismissed, the Allied base where he was located naturally had a new commander. Although Agent Tanya didn't like the commander's job, she still took over the position. The Alliance has a special relationship with the Allied forces, and the relationship between Agent Tanya and Wang Ling is even more subtle. Tanya dared to draw a gun and shoot Reagan because of Wang Ling. With such a fiery temper, what else can't she do? It was this girl who almost drained the war funds and built a large number of invader fighters and remote-controlled tanks. She wanted to use this to overthrow the psychic beacon and forcefully rescue Wang Ling. But she never expected that such a powerful lineup and offensive would be destroyed in the hands of Wang Ling, whom she wanted to save the most. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 782. You bastard, you bastard, you bastard. Staring at Wang Ling on the electronic map, Agent Tanya was so angry that she could not stop scolding him for one sentence. However, as she cursed, the corners of the girl's eyes became slightly moist again, but in front of the two deputies, she resisted the urge to vent her emotions. In order to rescue Wang Ling, Agent Tanya can be said to have spent a lot of money. 40 invader fighter planes and hundreds of remote-controlled tanks. Under normal circumstances, no matter which attack method is used, they are enough to bombard the entire mad new city. Not to mention that she would send them both out together just to be on the safe side. However, Wang Ling didn't appreciate it at all and destroyed these units with his own hands. It was like a naked slap in the face of Tanya's agent. The slap caused burning pain on Tanya's face and even deep bitterness in her heart. Seeing her like this, the two assistants glanced at each other, not knowing what to say and feeling quite at a loss. "No, we can't just let this matter go. Don't let me give up." However, Agent Tanya did not last long in this state. She quickly adopted the mentality of a strong woman and ordered, "Continue. Whether it is an intruder fighter plane or a remote-controlled tank, make it for me, and it will be better than the original one. Make more." "Sir, our combat funds have been exhausted. The hyperdimensional mining vehicle is working hard to mine minerals, but it cannot fill such a huge vacancy in an instant." However, the two assistants were in a dilemma. Agent Tanya had already exhausted the funds stored in the base in the last wave of attacks. Now she wanted to expand the army on a large scale, which was not possible in a short time. After hearing this, Agent Tanya couldn't help but get angry. "What do you do for food? What does this bastard Reagan do for food? How long has it been? How come you have saved so little money?" One of the assistants had a bitter look on his face. "Sir, this war is very expensive. General Reagan is already trying his best to save money. It's quite a lot to be able to keep so much. Another assistant complained quietly, what's the use of more funds? No amount of money can cope with such a squandering method. Hateful. Agent Tanya didn't hear what was said later, and quickly checked the base's funds storage situation, only to realize how stretched the base's funds were now. If he wanted to build invader fighter jets and remote-controlled tanks, he would still need to accumulate a lot of money. Time to achieve it. Already impatient and still short of funds, Agent Tanya was furious. After feeling really annoyed for a while, she suddenly remembered something and quickly turned on the radio. Ryan. That's right, this kind of embarrassing moment cannot be accomplished with one base. Agent Tanya's thought was to ask for help from other bases. General Ryan responded almost immediately, what's wrong, Tanya? Ryan was the one who took over Agent Tanya's position as commander before. The two of them had been working together for a long time, and they were not too familiar with each other. Agent Tanya didn't make any detours with him and directly spoke in a commanding tone. Said, you immediately build 20 Air Command headquarters and make them full of invader fighters. Why are you doing this? General Ryan was startled by the exaggerated tone and numbers. Agent Tanya didn't hide it either, I'm going to blow up the psychic beacon and rescue Wang Ling. General Ryan was silent. He didn't refuse immediately, but he didn't agree either. Agent Tanya added an explanation, did you see my previous attack? Wang Ling's firepower was too strong, and the remote-controlled tanks could not break through his defense line. Only the invader fighter planes could. I used 40 invader fighter planes and only bombed half of the HP of the psychic beacon has been lost. If we double the number of invader fighters, 80 invader fighters will definitely be able to blow up the psychic beacon 100%. General Ryan still didn't speak, and Agent Tanya noticed something was wrong after talking for so long. Just when she was about to urge her more, General Ryan suddenly shouted, Tanya! Wake up! This shout also startled Agent Tanya. Before she could protest, General Ryan began to question, Wang Ling is from the coalition, not from our allies. We have spent so much effort on him. Why don't we spend so much effort on him? It's worth it? Even though the coalition forces are uniting with us now, after the threat of the Mind Empire is over, our relationship will not continue like this. Wang Ling will be our enemy sooner or later. You are spending so much money and energy just to save him. Our future enemy. Can't you? But Agent Tanya was also stubborn, we'll talk about the future later. Now the coalition forces are still allies with us. Wang Ling was harmed like this by Reagan. We should all save him because of emotion and reason. Him. What's more, can you rest assured that his powerful firepower is being used by the Empire of Mind? Ryan also responded, Tanya, don't be so confused. Reagan's starting point for doing this is not wrong. Wang Ling will be a major threat to us sooner or later, and we should find a way to get rid of it during the joint stage. But Reagan messed up the matter. Not only did Wang Ling not die, but he was also controlled. This was the fundamental reason why he was convicted and dismissed. The anger of the coalition forces only fueled the flames. Wake up. Stop being so persistent. You bastard. What are you talking about? Agent Tanya was a little angry after hearing this, but more importantly, she was unwilling to accept it. General Ryan did not persuade anymore, and finally said, okay, I will build more airports according to your request, but at the moment of attack, all the intruder fighter planes will point their spearheads at Wang Ling. Tanya, don't forget your identity, you are the hero of the Allies, don't be so indecisive. After saying that, Agent Tanya cut off the radio without waiting for her to get angry. Asking Ryan for help but getting this result in the end, you can imagine how angry Agent Tanya is now. However, while she was angry, she was more helpless. Indeed, the alliance between the coalition forces and the Allied forces was not lasting. Making such a big sacrifice to rescue Wang Ling was indeed not worth it for the Allied forces. However, Agent Tanya was obsessed with this, but the relationship between the two military camps also made her troubled. After the radio was cut off, Tanya couldn't help but choked up at this result, no matter how strong she was. This group of invader fighter planes flew over Wang Ling's head. They did not drop bombs on Wang Ling. Instead, they flew to the central square at a greater cost and bombed the psychic beacon. It seems that the Allies did not want to take advantage of the opportunity to kill Wang Ling. Naturally, the coalition forces were unaware of the conversation between Agent Tanya and General Ryan. After seeing this result, General Li Wiki and the three generals in the command post breathed a sigh of relief. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Different Dimension Red Alert World. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 783. That's right, no matter how strong Wang Ling is, he is still an infantryman. If the intruder fighter planes want to bomb Wang Ling will definitely not be able to withstand a few missiles. When the group of intruder fighter planes flew over Wang Ling's head, had every opportunity to do so, but they chose to give up on this approach and instead bombed the psychic beacon at a greater cost. Although they failed, the attitude of the Allies has been clearly revealed. General Li Wiki and the others really didn't expect that Agent Tanya would be so persistent in Wang Ling and would spend all the base's funds to rescue Wang Ling. They preconceived this approach as the Allied forces' attitude. After all, Agent Tanya does have this qualification, doesn't she? After Xiaoping Wang and Rovsky analyzed the electronic video, they looked at General Li Wiki and asked, General, what do you think? General Li Wiki had been staring at the electronic video, recalling the scene just now, and pondered for a long time before replying, Wang Ling is like this because of his allies. Due to emotions and reasons, his allies should indeed assist in the rescue, this is understandable. We don't really expect the allies to succeed. What we want is actually an explanation and an attitude. As for the allies, they removed Reagan from his post and then used such a large force to rescue Wang Ling. This attitude, barely meeting the mark. Has the standard been met? The allies have also paid such a high price, so we can't keep refusing to respond. Should we restore the power supply to confirm this attitude? King Xiaoping then asked another question. But General Li Wiki shook his head and said, Wang Ling's matter is related to the trust between the two camps. It cannot be made hastily, and I have no right to make a decision. Look away, burn these videos and send them to the General Headquarters Rich Coach, let him make the decision on such an important matter. Yes. Rovitsky took the order and hurriedly started to operate it. Not long after, the entire Allied offensive was recorded and sent to Coach Rich. After receiving the video, Coach Rich held a meeting specifically for this purpose to discuss whether he should respond accordingly. During the meeting, some generals naturally hated the Allies, but more people remained rational. After some discussion, the headquarters finally issued an order to restore the power supply to the nuclear reactors to the Allies. Indeed, due to the Allied forces' retaliation these days, the Allied forces have suffered greatly due to power shortages. They have tried their best to build power plants and restore power. Now that the Allied forces have restarted power supply, it has not actually provided any substantial help to the Allied forces. However, this incident itself is a symbol, an attitude, and a response. The coalition forces acknowledged the Allied forces' attitude and expressed their position in this way. At the Allied headquarters, when General Bob and others learned of this situation, to be honest, everyone was a little confused. Why did the Allied forces go crazy and suddenly restore power? After some investigation, we found out that it was Agent Tanya who insisted on rescuing Wang Ling. The coalition forces found out about it and took it as an allied force, so she responded in this way. To be honest, after learning the cause and effect of this incident, some generals in the Allied General Headquarters were also laughing at the Allied forces. However, more people breathed a sigh of relief. Through this incident, the relationship between the Allied forces and the Allied forces has finally eased. The Allies did not disappoint the coalition's attitude. On the one hand, General Bob issued a separate commendation order for Agent Tanya. On the other hand, he also specifically notified General Ryan of the Mad New City Theater to abandon all plans specifically targeting Wang Ling. Attack plan to avoid stalemate relations between the two militaries again. After receiving this notice, General Ryan was naturally full of reluctance. After all, 6 Air Command headquarters had been established. With some time, a large number of invader fighter planes would bomb and kill Wang Ling, which would be just around the corner. However, this was General Bob's order. No matter how unwilling he was, General Ryan could not resist. He could only agree and stop the construction of all Air Command headquarters and invader fighters. Awesome, Wang Ling. When the coalition forces and the Allied forces expressed their opinions to each other for the sake of their relationship, Wang Ling, who was under control in Mater New City, returned to Yuri's base leisurely and saw Yuri X face to face. This majestic hero-level unit of the Seoul Empire actually came to greet Wang Ling in person, and praised him without hesitation. In saying this, Yuri, although they are both hero-level units, Yuri X's combat effectiveness is not even inferior to Wang Ling's. Why is Wang Ling so unscrupulous in Yuri's base, but Yuri X can do nothing about him? In addition to the importance of leader Yuri, the main reason is that Wang Ling's combat power is too strong, and he simply can't control it, and he doesn't dare to control it. I had seen Wang Ling's battle videos before and had a preliminary understanding of Wang Ling's power. Later, Wang Ling was controlled and almost killed the Allied attacking troops with one person. These had already amazed Yuri X, but not long ago this battle allowed Yuri X to refresh his understanding of Wang Ling's combat effectiveness. This guy is simply a pervert and a monster. No wonder leader Yuri named Wang Ling to be controlled. However, Wang Ling didn't pay attention to his attitude at all. He just glanced at him, ignored him, and passed Yuri X directly, walking towards the base with an indifferent expression, making Yuri X extremely embarrassed. Fortunately, he was used to Wang Ling's dark personality. Yuri fighters and remote-controlled tanks. They are all uncontrollable arms, and they are dispatched on such a large scale in succession, pointing directly at the psychic beacon. I can't tell, your status in the coalition and allied forces is quite high, and you don't hesitate to use such a large force. The price will be to take you back. Wang Ling tilted his head and glanced at him with some disdain. Just talk nonsense. Why do you think Yuri designed me specifically and not others? Good guy, this is too straightforward. Yuri, I destroyed these troops with my own hands. It's a bit funny to think about the expressions of the coalition and allied forces. Cut. Wang Ling curled his li different dimension red alert world. Author, Sanqian Lang. Chapter 784. When Wang Ling heard this, he stopped and turned his head to look at Yuri X. He seemed interested and asked, "Tell me, what do you mean?" Yuri, the allied forces are all obstacles to us, and they must be completely eliminated sooner or later. It is not our temperament to always defend without attacking. At present, the coalition and allied forces have 4 bases stationed outside Mater New City. For the sake of planning, we have enough. I have endured it and allowed them to make trouble for too long, so now I have to fight back. As he spoke, Yuri Wang Ling got started directly, enlarging the electronic map and showing it in video form. He saw many old acquaintances in it, such as Sun Dehua, Chen Tong, Huben, etc. The base designated by Yuri X turned out to be General Li Wiki's base. That is the base where Wang Ling was originally located. Seeing this, Wang Ling narrowed his eyes and mocked, I didn't expect you to be really cruel. You asked me to personally destroy my original base and kill all my old subordinates. Yuri snored. However, Wang Ling was very disrespectful. He snorted coldly and turned away. As he walked, he said sarcastically, stop trying to teach me your theories. I'm so annoyed. Who do you want to call in this base? Whoever goes, I won't go. Yuri, because that was your original base. To be honest, although Yuri X was used to Wang Ling's temper, he still felt a little unhappy every time he was rejected. This is not a prisoner, he is just an uncle. However, he was really out of breath when he was called fat. Wang Ling then glanced at Yuri. I don't care about giving orders. Yuri X really has nothing to say to him. Isn't this girl too casual? But if Wang Ling's combat power is put here, he really has the qualifications to be casual. Yuri X had no choice but to calm down, and quickly pointed to another coalition base and asked, what about this coalition base? Wang Ling glanced casually and waved his hand without thinking, I won't go. Yuri. There are some acquaintances who don't want to do anything. Wang Ling didn't bother to pretend or make up lies. He just didn't want to go. What can you do to me? Yuri. Who would have thought that Wang Ling still refused to give face, I won't go. Why is this? You were set up and you were about to fail, but the allies personally pushed you here. Don't you hate it? Yuri X was completely confused. He had no way to deal with Wang Ling. When this issue was mentioned, Wang Ling finally stopped again, looked at the electronic video, and smiled evilly, hate? Of course I hate it. I wish I could kill Reagan with my own hands and destroy the entire Allied forces. However, this Allied forces base is an exception. Where are the exceptions? The previous invader fighter jets and remote-controlled tanks all came from this base. Their purpose was to destroy the psychic beacon and rescue me. Although I destroyed these troops with my own hands, I, Wang Ling, also received this heart. At this point, Wang Ling started to play with it again. Besides, I saw from the electronic video before that bastard Reagan was picked up by a helicopter a long time ago, and the person in charge of this base now is Tanya. This little bitch, I had an idea to snatch her back. How could I kill her so quickly? Yuri. There was only the last Allied base left, which seemed to be building an airport. Yuri X didn't hold out much hope, so he just pointed at it subconsciously. But this time, before he could ask, Wang Ling answered first, it's him. Huh? You won't refuse this time. Yuri X's eyes lit up. Wang Ling smiled and said, the commander of this base is Ryan. I'm not familiar with him, and Agent Tanya isn't here either. I won't discuss beating him. Okay. After all the talk with you, I finally got you to move. Yuri X was finally happy. It was not easy to get Wang Ling to move. Of course, a promise is a promise, but not now. Wang Ling shook his arms and added in a lazy tone, it's already dusk now, and I'm too lazy to fight at night. Let's rest for one night and go back tomorrow. Then. Just prepare your troops in advance. I don't care about the rest, just prepare a few magneto-electric tanks for me. This Allied base cannot escape. Okay. Yuri. After finally getting rid of this annoying guy, Wang Ling rolled his eyes, stretched, wandered around the base for a while, ate some dinner, and then came to the tent specially prepared for him and lay down to rest. Before he was under control, every time Wang Ling lay down, he would subconsciously return to the real world for a transition. While resting, he would recuperate the wildness brought out in the world of Red Alert. However, after being controlled, the blackened Wang Ling had no intention of returning to the real world. This time he lay down and fell asleep without any intention of returning. In the real world, it was afternoon, and Xiao He was always in front of Wang Ling's bed, looking at Wang Ling who was sleeping, feeling somewhat confused. The speed of time in the red alert world is different from that in the real world, but after all, there is still a concept of time, but it is 10 times faster than in the real world. When I lay down and entered the red alert world, it was still last night, but I was controlled. Although such a long time had passed in the red alert world, most of the day had passed in the real world, and it was the afternoon of the next day. According to usual habits, Wang Ling should wake up during this period, but now Wang Ling is still sleeping. Xiao He does not know what is happening in the red alert world, so he is naturally confused now.